This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. Communities across North Dakota can see big possibilities for education, infrastructure, conservation, and more. The state's oil and natural gas industry helps make them happen. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk. I'm your host, Rob Port. Here with me is Congressman Kelly Armstrong to talk about a lot of things that are happening in Washington as we transition from the Trump era into the Biden era of American politics. And a lot going on, Kelly. Joe Biden has been very active in the early days of his administration with a lot of executive orders, a historic number of executive orders, which just Republican or Democrat, I'd like to get away from that, right? We're not supposed to have kings. I don't like this whiplash in policy from like the day after inauguration. Suddenly all the policies are different and we're just issuing all these executive orders. It's starting to become the norm. And I think we have Congress in a deliberative process for a reason. Anyway, we'll get into all of that. But first, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. We're here. We're working. It's obviously I've got great staff. We've got all of that, but there's a lot of serious challenges that we're facing because of what you just introed with, and we're not taking a minute off. We have to deal with all of them.
First, to talk about one thing that you're dealing with that's kind of it's unusual. We have a member of Congress, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, elected from, I'm forgetting which district in Georgia, sent to Congress. She had some very objectionable things that she said in the past, that she's positions that she's associated herself with in the past on social media and elsewhere. Congress took a vote. The House of Representatives took a vote to strip her of committee assignments. And I know there was in your Republican caucus in the House, she gave a speech. She sort of renounced some of these things that she said in the past. But very unusual thing for somebody to be stripped of their committee assignments like that. Not something that happens every day. I know that you voted against it. Give us some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, it's never happened the way it happened before, where the other party determines what committees the minority party holds. And let's be clear, and let's start with this. There's no defending the things she said. There's no defending her Facebook posts. They're horrible. They're terrible. They're inaccurate. They're conspiracy theory, and they're just absolutely indefensible. The problem is she didn't violate a rule. She didn't violate a rule in Congress, and they essentially used your code of conduct, which is a generalized rule, which is important, but it only applies to you as a member of Congress. And so we better be very, very careful about this because, like I said, there's no defending Marjorie Taylor Greene's comments, but you have to defend the voters of her district to send who they want to Congress, and that's just the bottom line. And I'm just really concerned this turns into another one of those escalating issues with whoever the party in power is now going to determine. Democrats are going to determine which Republicans serve on which committees. And rules are always there for a reason, and you don't get to go past your rules for special cases. That's just not how this body should work or anyone else should work.
Yeah. Listen, there's been a lot of people elected to Congress that I find objectionable for various reasons. They say things that I think are irresponsible, things that I think are false. But yet I don't begrudge the people who elected them their choice, right? That's how it's supposed to work. Like you said, I'm not interested at all in defending anything Marjorie Taylor Greene had to say, but she didn't commit a crime. It is not illegal in the United States to believe stupid things or to say stupid things. So she didn't break any laws, and I'm a proponent of voters getting what they voted for, good and hard.
Well, and if she would have said those things as a member of Congress, that's a very different conversation because that's when our internal rulemaking authority kicks in. But I got this a lot and again, we talk about hypocrisy, and you and I talked about it, but I got a lot of calls, texts, emails in my first year in Congress about doing, the same thing with Representative Omar and how we're not why aren't you filing a motion to expel her? All of those different things. And my response finally was, She won with 70+% of her vote in her district. She had the same situation. I mean, most of her comments were made prior to getting elected. I mean, I don't know why anybody thinks a guy from North Dakota should determine who people in Minnesota send. And I don't know why anybody
Georgia,
thinks a guy from California and the opposite party should get to determine who the voters of Georgia send to Congress and what they do here.
Yeah. No, I agree with that entirely. And you could draw that distinction between what she said, which, again, neither of us are defending, and the fact that the voters in Georgia are allowed to send somebody like that to Congress. And if they have regret over it, they have options to replace her.
Yeah, and I'm on the Republican Steering Committee, which, I mean, you know, we help populate the committees. And if she just said these things while she was there, I'd have been the first one saying she shouldn't get a committee. You don't get to do that when you're a member. But if we are going to hold everybody out here accountable for everything they said prior to being a member of Congress, we're going to have a hard time putting anybody out.
Well, especially as we move into the social media era. I remember there was an old Onion article several years ago talking about how every single person of the millennial generation has been disqualified for serving as president because of things they posted on social media when they were teenagers. And not that that's comparable. Marjorie Taylor Greene said her things when she was an adult and not that long ago. But still, I mean, we're moving into the social media age. I think a lot of people have, including very good people, you know, very nice people, people that I'm related to, have posted things that on social media that I know that they regret and that they wish they had never posted because they were angry or maybe they weren't as informed on the issue as they should have been. Whatever the reason. It happens. And, I mean, if that's going to be the level of accountability, it's going to be problematic. She should be held accountable for everything she said. But the people who should hold her accountable should be her voters, her constituents in her district.
Well, and Congress has the ability to hold her accountable. I mean, we make our own rules. We have the ability to hold her accountable for everything she says from the time she was elected until whenever
why that distinction,
being a member of Congress. And we should.
Why that distinction, though? Why is there a difference between her saying it before being elected and after elected? I guess I'm not understanding
because our rule. I think the very simplest way to put this is if it said before you're elected and you're not here yet and the voters choose you anyway, I go back to what I said. Why should a Democrat in California get to determine what kind of representation a district in Georgia has? And that's why the distinction is there. And we don't have our internal rulemaking has no effect on any private citizen, and nor should it. So, I mean, it is a big distinction, and it's about how this place works. And that's one of the things. I mean, the general public doesn't want to hear necessarily about that, but it's really important because otherwise you're going to get. I mean, we're seeing it with the executive orders, and we're seeing it with the majority party, and you know, it's the smallest margin in history, or in at least in a generation. And the Democrats, instead of recognizing that in the U.S. House, are changing all of the rules, all the procedures, in order that they can dictate how Republicans operate in D.C. And that's bad for places like North Dakota.
Well, in the House,
that's just the way it is.
In the House as well, I don't think it helps. I don't think it helps when Congress is so fractured that it can't act, because that creates a power vacuum into which we get the executive orders. Right? That empowers the presidents, Republican or Democratic, to just sort of do their own thing. And that's, I mean, even aside from policy and ideology and everything else, it's not supposed to work that way. There's separation of powers, and we're going to get into the executive orders in a moment. You know, so from that perspective, it's not a good thing. But also from the perspective that you have a Congress and you have 435 members, and the Democrats now have fewer of those seats than they did prior to Election Day, right? So the Democrats are carrying on like they have some great mandate from the public to implement their policy, when in reality, the public narrowed their majority significantly.
And so they're changing the rules so they can still implement that majority without having to deal with the minority party who gained seats in the election. You're exactly right. And the bigger systemic problem with that is the longer these types of things go on, the more and more, I mean, members you're going to lose, because they're just simply like, life's too short to do this. And the place needs to function. And you're right about the executive orders. I said it in a hearing when President Trump was still president and judiciary. You know, James James Madison said that Congress would fight tooth and nail to protect its Article 1 authority, and I think he was wrong. Congress usually will fight tooth and nail to protect their ability to stay in Congress. Yeah. And if that means giving the executive branch more authority, they're completely comfortable doing it. We need to take it back. And I said that. I said that under a Republican president.
So let's come back to the executive orders. Joe Biden comes into office, and despite a lot of campaign rhetoric about being unifying and being a president for all members of the country, started issuing executive orders that I described in a column as sort of kicking our part of the world in the teeth. The Keystone XL pipeline is important to North Dakota. I don't want to say it's unimportant to North Dakota, but it's probably more important to maybe other parts of the country and world than it is to us. But I think what the Keystone XL pipeline decision, among other executive orders, portends, when we start talking about banning oil development on mineral lands or putting a moratorium, or on federal lands, putting a moratorium on them. I mean, there's a lot of things. The Biden administration's position on the Keystone XL pipeline, they're now sort of in the driver's seat on the Dakota Access Pipeline. There's an ongoing lawsuit. The defendant in that lawsuit is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And on Inauguration Day, they just got a new boss who is very anti-pipeline. And by the way, his vice president has called for the pipeline to be shut down. So that's where we're sitting now. If you're a president for all the country, even setting aside how you feel about oil or pipelines or anything else, if you're going to be a president for every part of the country, how can you justify acting that swiftly without any input, without any coordination with people here in places like North Dakota, and saying, well, I'm your president, but also I'm just going to do these knee-jerk executive orders to satisfy my base? Those are mutually exclusive things.
Yeah, I mean, it's not bringing unity, right? I mean, and I don't think anything that's happened in the last month has really driven towards that. But I can't. I mean, Keystone's unique because it needs a presidential permit, which is why, because it crosses the Canadian border, and that's why we introduced legislation to say that if the environmental processes are done, that the presidential order is no longer needed. By the way, that's good legislation also, regardless of who's in the White House. But you have to, I mean, you're exactly right. It's Dakota Access, it's Enbridge in Minnesota, Michigan, Duke and Dominion in Virginia. There were all the nuisance lawsuits in federal court, all the nuisance lawsuits in each individual state you're processing. And then, but just by a new president being elected, it all goes away after it's already been issued. How are you ever going to raise capital for any infrastructure project? I mean, they all, whether it's a pipeline, a transmission line, a highway, they all take longer than 4 years to get done. I mean, even, and a lot of times get started. This is combined with who this administration is putting in Treasury regarding and their thoughts on private equity. This is a serious long-term problem that far exceeds the Keystone XL pipeline.
One of the frustrating things about this is that to me, I want a very vigorous regulatory process around all of these projects. Pipelines carry a hazardous material. Right? If a pipeline leaks, that's a big problem. We don't want that to happen. I want a very rigorous process around that. I want a lot of scrutiny, but I also want there to be a finish line. I want there to be a point at which, okay, well, we've checked all the boxes. All the people who need to review this have reviewed it. We have the reports. We have everything. We've made a decision. We've issued a permit. We're now crossed the finish line, and that's it. You know, what's frustrating is that you get across what's supposed to be the finish line, and then the lawsuits start. Where and we know that our friends in the environmentalist movement, they're going to file lawsuits regardless. I mean, they talk about it. They're open about it. They raise a whole bunch of money, and they're going to litigate everything as obstruction. And then we have politicians who want to jump in to pander to their base, and they're gonna issue special executive orders or whatever, and they're gonna pull permits or issue permits or whatever. There needs to be a predictable process with a finish line that we could build pipelines, especially because we're all using the oil. I mean, that's the frustrating thing too. Is I keep talking about this, so I'm blue in the head. The most rabid anti-oil, violent pipeline protester is putting gasoline in his car to get to the protest. We're all using the oil. Pipelines are the best way to transport the oil, but yet we have this ideological objection to pipelines. It is ridiculous.
It is. And by the way, this problem exists. You think it's hard to get a pipeline? In a local community, try putting transmission lines in. This is an infrastructure project an attack on infrastructure, an attack on the heartland of the United States that far exceeds one single energy source. And these problems have to be dealt with. And you're exactly right. Everybody always thinks it's no regulation versus regulation, and that's not the fight. The fight is we want regulatory certainty that isn't duplicative, isn't redundant, and has what you said, a finish line. Now, I think the finish line should be a significantly shorter and realistic timeline than 10 years or 12 years or 14 years.
Yeah.
But and particularly, and these things cost money, and there's three ways you can raise money for these: raise taxes, cut other services, or get private equity involved. And those are the three ways you raise money for infrastructure projects. And they are essentially getting to the point where the third option is not going to be viable.
Yeah, it's it's frustrating, and especially like you said, it's not just pipelines, it's roads, it's transmission lines. All the people out there who are saying, yay wind power, and I'm not necessarily against wind power. I think we've probably promoted it faster than it should have been, but whatever, it's here.
Well, and it's not baseload.
And it's not baseload, which is problematic in and of itself. And also, by the way, what is baseload? The baseload power that is replacing coal, by the way, is natural gas, which in our part of the world is mostly a byproduct of oil production. So when we're banning oil and gas development while simultaneously driving the coal industry out of the marketplace with government policies, we're making ourselves more dependent on natural gas, which this administration also doesn't want to produce. So
no, and they don't want to move it in a pipeline. And remember, every Democrat, or just about every Democrat in the U.S. House, voted against transporting liquefied natural gas by rail as well.
Yeah. So how in the world are we going to do this? And is it just a call? Because I know you go out there and you talk with a lot of your colleagues from other parts of the country. Is it just a disconnect? We always joke about people who are in the supermarket who don't really know where their food comes from. Right, that's kind of a North Dakota joke, right? Because a lot of us are very familiar with farming and agriculture and ranching. We see how the sausage gets made, literally, when it comes to agriculture. So how is it just a disconnect that they don't live to where the energy gets made? Like they're so far removed from it that they just assume it's going to keep showing up and they can do whatever they want?
Yeah, at a time when we've had more education at the touch of our fingertips by that nice petroleum-based phone you have in your pocket, there's never been a bigger distinction between producing states and consuming states, and producing districts and consuming districts. There just hasn't. And we really, and that's even if you're talking Keystone XL or Dakota Access, everybody thinks this is a North Dakota, South Dakota issue. Well, prior to COVID, we essentially had negative unemployment in Western North Dakota. The people working on that pipeline aren't from here. They're union members in Wisconsin and Ohio and Illinois. And one thing Republicans have always been bad at, and we can have that conversation on the climate change debate too, we can do these big conceptual arguments, energy independence, national security versus the Green New Deal, but we don't do a very good job of talking about what this costs at a human level. If these policies continue to move forward, the people who are going to be hurt the worst are poor people and the lower middle class, because their disposable income is going to go down significantly because their monthly energy bills are going to go up significantly, and there's no way around that. And then people who have, we're talking about coming out of a pandemic, infrastructure is a part of that conversation. These are great paying jobs that provide for families and provide for communities and do all of those things. And we're just taking them away because people in the administration and on the other side of the aisle want to capitulate to earth justice.
And I think you made a very good point there. It's not just about pipeline jobs, right? And I hate how dismissive people are about those jobs. Oh, they're just temporary. Hey, here's a hint. All construction jobs are temporary, right? You move from one project to the next. It's the nature of the industry. You're building something. Eventually, you're done building it. That's just how it is. So that's a nonsense argument to begin with. But it's not just about roughnecks and pipeliners and those sorts of people, although those jobs are hugely important, and I don't want to be dismissive of them at all. But it's also about the librarian who just needs to fill up the gas in her car to get to work. right? When her fuel prices go up, librarians don't make a ton of money. Their fuel prices go up. That hurts them. That's less disposable income that they have because they got to get to work. When your natural gas bill goes up, when your electric bill goes up, that's less money that you're going to have available to do fun things like take a vacation or take your kid to the bookstore or something like that. So the economic impact isn't just energy sector jobs, so those are very important. It's everybody. We're all using oil. We're all using gas. It happens every day. When the prices goes up, it hurts all of us.
And by the way, the production of oil and gas in North Dakota has actually helped the United States lead the way in carbon emission reductions. Like, we don't talk about this seriously, and Republicans are bad at it too. And we were bad at getting in the game on this and not recognizing how important this issue is to anybody under the age of 30. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat. You know, climate change rates is a 1, 2, or 3 issue for 85% of the people under 30, and the intensity level of the issue is really high. We have to talk about this, but we have to talk about it in solutions that actually reduce carbon emissions and also don't put U.S. economy at a complete global disadvantage to our strategic adversaries, being Russia and China.
Yeah, it's frustrating. So you've backed legislation, and I believe our senators have backed something similar in the Senate chamber to deal with. Tell us specifically about the legislation. It was inspired by Keystone XL, but my understanding is the implications are bigger than that.
Well, it is. I mean, the big implication is you don't need the presidential permit. If you get the EIS is valid. All of these things work. And basically, this goes to what you said, because not only is the finish line a long ways away, Rob, but apparently after you cross it, they can take away your trophy because that's exactly what happened. So this just gives that certainty. And it is. It's like I said, this is good policy regardless of who's in the White House. And it allows for people to know what they have to do, which is incredibly burdensome to begin with. But once you have it, you have it. But getting rid of that presidential permit and allowing the environmental agencies to deal with the permitting based on science instead of politics is always going to be a good idea.
How likely, when I've been reading some of the reports about this, they're calling this legislation a long shot. And
yep.
I mean, it is. I mean, it's a Democratic-controlled House. I mean, we're talking. You're pushing back against actions of the president of the party that has the majority in the House and a very slim majority in the Senate. So, how do you win I mean, it is a long shot. Is there a possibility of winning Democrats over to this?
Well, I've been talking to my colleagues, and one of the things, and this is what I'm talking about, being better at telling the actual story and not just the North Dakota-Montana pipeline story, because you're right, we need Democrats. But there are Democrats in Congress that have, whether it's Texas or different areas across the country, that have expressed some consternation at environmental proposals. But now and this is what I tell my friends, now's the point. You don't get to talk about it anymore. There's an action item right here that is really simple. It's not an overreach from the federal government. It actually makes sense. It's a beginning and end, and it makes the policy based on policy and not politics. So we need 6 or 7 Democrats in the U.S. House to say, you know what, enough is enough. And we support responsible energy production too. And they can't just talk about it now. Now we have a chance to get them. And if we get 5 or 6 Democrats, then we have a shot in the House.
That's a tough get, though. I mean, even that many Democrats, when I look at how entrenched the positions are over energy, I mean, it's if you're a Democrat these days and you even hint that you might be in favor of continuing to produce energy through oil production or gas production, the Democratic base speaks very loudly about that, and which is part of the problem is everybody in Congress is too busy listening to their bases sometimes. But it troubles me because I just don't know how you peel Democrats off right now.
Well, I think 2 things. One, it's unfortunate this is no longer a bipartisan issue because, you know, reliable energy and cheap electricity and reliable electricity should be a bipartisan issue. But 2, eventually your district matters. I mean, do you think these executive orders are good for the state of New Mexico?
No, they're not.
They're not. It's a huge percentage of their state's economy and their state's budget. So, I mean, eventually Democrats that are in these producing states, and there aren't that many, anymore. We don't need that many of them. Are going to have to get together and figure out if they're going to support their district or if they're going to support an ideological wing of their party that they don't actually agree with.
Do you beyond your legislation? I mean, what else can Congress do? I mean, I guess legislate is really the only thing you can do. But when we're watching, it's harmful even when we have such a whiplash from one presidential administration to the next. I mean, our politics are hugely volatile, and we're trying to build these pipelines, and we just there's no certainty. And really, this just occurred to me. It's kind of funny. You voted against the effort to, or you were not supportive of the effort to overturn the election results or to have Congress not certify the election results. And you made a constitutional argument. And really, in a lot of ways, that's similar to what we're talking about here. When it comes to election law, there's a finish line, right? There's a process by which each state counts their votes. They certify their votes. There's checks and balances where legislatures have options if they feel like something untoward has happened. By the time it reaches Congress, the finish line is really passed, right? Congress did not have any grounds, right? There were no legislatures, including, most of the places where these votes were disputed had Republican legislatures that could have acted and could have sent Congress
5 out of 6.
Right, 5 out of 6 could have sent Congress like alternate electors or something like that. I mean, they could have acted, and they didn't. And so the thing is, there was a finish line, and there was a process, and there was scrutiny on the process, and there were checks and balances, and it produced a result. And sometimes you just have to accept that result, even if you don't like it. And so, Democrats were very critical of Republicans who wanted to object to that process, and still are. But yet, for some reason, when we have a process to build a pipeline that has checks and balances and multiple levels of scrutiny, right? We have executive branch, we have legislatures that write laws, we have the courts that are always a venue to settle any disputes and can provide review and are endless provide. Sometimes I think our judges are in charge of building pipelines more than anyone else. I mean, that process exists, and once we cross the finish line, it's like sometimes you just have to accept you don't like this pipeline, fine, but it's going to be built. Because the process that we've established with all its checks and balances has produced an outcome. We're not very good at accepting outcomes in this country anymore.
No, and by the way, that's exactly right when you're talking about judges and all of that. I mean, that's why that stuff's so important. But no, we're not, and we need to get better at it. But I think this is, unfortunately, I think if anybody remembers in the Obama administration that the U.S. v. Heller came out, and that was the first really standalone Supreme Court case on the
Second Amendment
in a generation.
Yeah.
And so the Obama administration recognized that case was there. So, they went after surplus brass for 5.56, which is what the military uses. They bought a bunch of primers for DOD and national security, and they essentially squeezed the ammunition market really, really hard. The ammunition market's being squeezed right now because there's millions of more gun owners, and if each one of them buys 2 boxes of shells, it just good. All the COVID supply chains. But I think that's what's really at stake here, and I think this is what we have to be vigilant. They're going after the investment. We've seen it in the hearings, right? We've seen Representative Ocasio-Cortez go after banks for investing in carbon fuels. We're seeing who the Biden administration is putting in Treasury to go after private equity. You don't have to win these lawsuits to win because the plaintiffs are different in every one of the cases. But you delay it and you delay it and you delay it and you rise and you drive up the cost. And then the longer you delay it, another permit gets challenged. And sooner or later, you are going to starve off any private equity that would ever build these infrastructure projects. And that's their game. And that is, I'm not saying that's necessarily every Democrat's game, but that is the environmental left game, and they're good at it, and they're looking at it long term. And then that's why even though we have to deal with the issue that's in front of us today, and that's Keystone XL, but we always have to be conscious that the long term goal is that, because if you if you can starve off the investment money, we are going to have real problems in North Dakota and across the country.
Well, what can be done about that? Because the divestment movement is a lot of people who are sort of targeting, I would say, politically vulnerable or politically institutions that can be influenced through politics, where you're going to, like say to a university, and the university has a foundation or they have a trust or something that's obviously going to be invested. And so, but universities are all obviously very, very sensitive to politics. So you get a student movement or something, and they come in and they say, well, we want you to divest from investments in coal or oil or natural gas. And the next thing you know, you have all these funds across the country. I mean, we saw it during the Dakota Access Pipeline protest. What was it? The Seattle City Council was going to stop doing business with Wells Fargo because Wells Fargo was involved in some way in helping to finance the pipeline project. I mean, they're going after it that way, and then even right down to the protests, where you got people chaining themselves to bulldozers, which obviously protracts the construction process and drives up. It's a war of attrition. And
it's more insidious than that. I mean, I'm just going to call out BP and GM. I mean, their shareholders are BP said they're going to be carbon neutral by 2035.
No, they're not.
GM said they're going to be electric by 2035. Well, you know why they use 2035? It's really simple, because 2040 sounds like it's too far away. And if they go 2030, that's within 10 years, and they actually have to put an action plan together. Neither one of them, I'm going to say it right now, has any plans of actually being carbon neutral at 2035. That is a statement to deal with their own internal shareholders who are demanding something that is completely unrealistic. And far too often, people on my side of the aisle don't call them out about it. And we need to start doing it, because it is just feeding this frenzy. And I don't know if there's an issue that will cause more people to run out of a room with their hair on fire than climate, carbon, and those issues. We need reasonable, realistic solutions, and this ain't it.
Well, and the public's perception is my friend and fellow columnist Mike Jacobs had a piece the other day, talking about how, we need to move on from oil. And he was touting some statistics, some of the successes that the Tesla motor company has had, right? And I say this, I'm an Elon Musk fan. I think he's doing a lot of amazing things with SpaceX, with Tesla. I also think that the future of electric cars in America is bright. I think there's a lot of uses of them, from utility vehicles, the delivery vans that maybe companies like FedEx or UPS use, maybe even to daily drivers for people picking up groceries. I think the future's bright. I'm not sure it's quite here yet for most people, but Teslas are a cool technology.
Well,
I'm cheering them on. But I mean, the problem is
me too. But
sorry, go
somebody's
ahead.
got to tell me where we're getting the lithium or the cobalt.
Right. Well, China.
Somebody's got to answer that question.
Right.
Well, yeah, but even China. I mean, just to move the American fleet from 1% to 10%, we don't have it.
Yeah.
The world doesn't produce it.
This isn't
a question about whether it's a good idea or not. We don't have the supply.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And if you leave the market to its own devices, right? Eventually, if production starts risking outstripping supply, prices go up, right? And then that price serves as a ration in the market.
Go look at the environmental impact of a lithium mine.
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, also, where are we going to put all these batteries when we're done with them too? I mean, that's something that people aren't talking about. But I'm not against, but also, even if you look at Tesla, there are not that many electric, even in California, it's like 600 out of 1,000, every 100,000 registrations are all electric plug-in vehicles. It's not that many, even in California, which is sort of the epicenter of electric vehicles. Tesla itself is not, I mean, one thing that Mike's pointed out is, he's talking about like stock prices and everything. Tesla's production is a fraction of what just General Motors production is. And if you start looking at profitability, Tesla makes a ton of money because I think it's something like 14 states, including California, have said that automakers have to sell a certain percentage of electric vehicles. And so what a lot of those automakers do, Tesla's competitors, and this is insidious, what they've been doing is they're paying Tesla to make electric vehicles because they aren't making them or don't want to make them, or I don't know why they're not making them. But for those payments, which amount to a government-mandated subsidy, Tesla would not be a profitable company because the market for electric vehicles really doesn't exist
yet. And you get a $10,000 discount for a $70,000 car.
Right.
I mean, the other answer we have to discuss about this is, one, how reliable are they long-term? Are you going to trade them in? Is there going to be entry into the market that exists before? I mean, if you have a private plane and drive a Tesla, you should not be getting a $10,000 discount because it's helping
a tax credit.
It just doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. Well, and that kind of brings us full circle where we're talking about, we keep pushing coal out, we keep pushing oil and gas out. What is that going to do to the utility bills and the gas bills and all the cost of living for Americans who maybe don't have a lot of disposable income? It's going to hurt them. But simultaneously, we're subsidizing Hollywood celebrities who are buying flashy new Teslas and driving around. I mean,
they're wearing no Dapple T-shirts on TV.
Right. It is arcane. I mean, it is a terrible thing. So I don't know. I mean, it seems though. I mean, the policy you're proposing is great, but it just seems like we're gonna have. And what I'm really scared, and maybe this is my last question for you, Kelly. What really scares me is that we're gonna have to come up against some ugly reality before people get it, that we can't just I mean, it's one thing if the market leads us away from oil and coal and natural gas in different ways. I mean, if the market's leading
and
us
it will,
and it will one day. It's just not. I don't think it's going to be in my lifetime, but it will one day. One day it's going to make more sense to have maybe something we haven't even invented yet is going to be the way we power our vehicles around or how we move around the country. I don't know. If I did know, I'd be a lot richer than I am. But the point is, we are using politics, not the marketplace, not the realities of, well, this is what it costs to make an electric vehicle versus that's all so distorted. Politics is driving this stuff. And I'm afraid that it's going to have to drive us over some sort of an economic cliff before people start to get it. I think that's what happened in the housing markets, right? We all remember the big collapse and the banks collapsed, and a lot of that was because we had government policy that was pushing loans to people who had no business getting them. We got exuberant. We said, well, this was great, and we're going to get all these outcomes, and then it crashed. And I'm afraid that this is going to crash too. We're going to push, and we're going to push, and then it's going to crash, and it's going to hit us right in the quality of life. Maybe that's too dark, but I'm hoping it doesn't.
Well,
I'm afraid that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, I mean, I'm only hopeful in the regard that we've seen some of this with brownouts in California. We've seen Germany go through the same thing, and they hit that crisis. These industries are incredibly resilient and tend to survive. The problem is we churn out really good people and really good small business in the process. But eventually grids become a part of this conversation. Being able to travel from one place to another becomes part of the conversation. So I'm at least hopeful that there's an actual real world backstop that exists before the economic collapse portion of it.
Well, I hope it doesn't take that. And I should add, I mean, if you think that those things are just happening in California, we have been very close on the regional power. Yeah. And there's a couple of power grids that serve North Dakota. But we have been very close, and Meso's the big one. We have been very close a few times to running out of energy. And if a lot of times it happens during extreme weather when it's really cold or it's really hot and everybody's using a lot of energy to heat their homes and everything else. But for the fact that if those weather patterns had been bigger and had impacted our neighboring grids more, they may not have had the energy to send us onto our grids to keep the lights on in North Dakota. And I got to tell you, power outages in North Dakota are a life and death thing.
It's and it's often the most vulnerable amongst us.
Yeah, well, it's a terrible thing. I hope it doesn't come to that, but I'm afraid that to convince and to cut through some of the ideology and politics. Unfortunately, I think that may be what it takes. Hopefully, we'll right the course before then. But Kelly, good luck out there in Washington. I know that's probably not a fun place to be these days, but hopefully we can.
Best job I've ever had, other than coaching baseball.
Well, okay, I guess that's fair. What do you think about it? Are we going to have a good baseball season this year? It sounds like we're going to have at least a somewhat shortened season, but.
Yeah, in the realm of 2020, we lost a lot of great baseball players too.
We did.
It's just kind of, every baseball season's a good baseball season, Rob.
That's true. I need baseball in my life right now. I really do. 2020 was a tough year.
I'll end with this. A really smart coach told me when I started coaching, when you coach in a small town, you're going to have really good teams and you're going to have really bad teams. But the vast majority of the teams you coach are going to be 60-40, 40-60, just a small town North Dakota American Legion baseball team.
Yeah.
More so than anything else, the journey is the journey is the fun part. The destination is not always the end goal. And I remember hearing that as a 21-year-old kid. And my best part about coaching baseball is I know where just about every single one of the kids I coached is, and they're doctors and orthodontists and dentists, and and some of them are coaching their kids now in my hometown, and it's just a really cool thing. And we need to get a little more of that kind of attitude about coming in, because the game doesn't have a time limit. You play as long as it needs to go, and it's a team sport and an individual sport, and there's a reason that there's a lot of analogies about baseball and life.
And a slow sport that gives you a lot of time to think about things, to talk about the people you're with. It's a beautiful thing. But anyway,
there's nowhere more lonely in the world than a pitching mound when you can't throw a strike. And there's nowhere more exciting to be than a dugout after you got a game-winning Texas League bloop single.
Well, maybe that's fodder for our one day, often planned but never executed baseball podcast. That
I think we should plan it for All-Star Weekend this year and just get it on the calendar.
Just get it done. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll talk with your people. We'll see what needs to be done. Kelly, thanks for your time.
You do the pros. I'll do the North Dakota stuff, because I'll know what's going on from Legion baseball from one end of the state to the other.
Well, that sounds good. All right, Kelly, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Later.